everybody, this is Val. Back with another video. Hope you're all doing well. I had kind of a busy day today with a lot of errands and chores and whatnot, but I wanted to carve some time out to do another video. And next on my list of topics, of which there are many, I'm going to tackle how did I get into comic books? How did I get into comic books? Short answer was that when I was a really a really small child, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, there were three television shows playing in rotation all the time in my house, and they all featured Batman. And so the short answer as to how I got into comics is I got into comics through Batman, through Batman and other media. And isn't that the case sort of now, like nowadays too, right? Like how do all these little kids of the newest generation, how are they getting into Spider-Man and Batman and all this sort of stuff? They're getting it in almost almost exclusively through other media. But when I was a little kid, I got exposed to the Batman mythos through TV. And so what did we have on TV? Well, 5 days a week in syndication, they had the 1960s Batman TV show reruns starring Adam West and Burt Ward. And the moment I saw that show, began to watch that show, I was completely obsessed. Completely upset. Like that really, if I had to pinpoint one thing that got me into this whole thing, it was that show. I just like that. The theme song would start playing and the opening would start playing for that show on the TV, and I would be like 3 years old, going like Batman, Batman, Batman. I was running back and forth in the house. I mean, just going Batman, it's Batman. And then I'd be and then I'd be sitting there in front of the television, and at first, we only had a black and white TV, so I'm sitting in front of this big black and white TV and saying Batman, Batman, yeah, that's Batman, and I would take the show completely seriously. So to me, it was like a serious dramatic program that I was watching. So when the cliffhangers, like, oh my God, is Batman gonna survive? Like it was everything. So that's a large part of my world. Just the Batman, the 1966 Batman TV series alone was a huge part of my life as a child. But wait, there's more, because they also had in the late 70s a cartoon called the New Adventures of Batman and Robin, and it featured the voices of Adam West and Burt Ward from the old 60s TV show. So there's that continuity there, and so and in my child's brain and mind, it's all the same TV show. Like 2, 3 years old, I'm just like, it's all the same TV show. It's all just one big blob of an entertainment thing. So I'd watch that on Saturdays, and then of course that iconic show. There was also, I believe it's by Hanna-Barbera, Super Friends, the Super Friends, which was on for many seasons, through the 70s into the very early 80s. And that featured, of course, like all the different DC Comics superheroes, but I mean, definitely Batman and Robin were front and center of that show. So there you had three programs playing all the time, and I would just be like, Batman, 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 Batman. So I was like not even super like I didn't have a lot of knowledge about the comic books. I think the first Batman comic I ever read, probably like around 5 or 6 years old. My dad bought me they call those treasury editions of Batman, Batman stories. So it's like an oversized tabloid reprint edition of a bunch of old Batman stories, I believe from like the 40s to through the 60s. And so that was like my supplementary Batman stuff. And so in terms of like comic books and stuff, like this type of Batman was the Batman I knew as a comic book, right? This, this is a reprint from a few years ago of I think the is it the first Robin story? It's some early, it's Batman #5, so it's probably like the first Robin story, or first Joker story, something like that. But this is what I was familiar with, as a child, and I could pretty much understand more or less what was going on with that with that. My cat was on my lap, and now she's she's jumped off my lap, and now she's going to cause tremendous problems. So if you hear my cat, that's my cat. Anyway, yeah, that's the Batman I knew. So I wasn't really reading contemporary Batman comics in the late '70s, early '80s until my dad took me to the took me to a comic specialty store and bought me I'm gonna do this. Bought me okay Detective Comics, and this was from 19. I believe these were from 1980. Let's see, is it 1980? 1980, yeah. So these are from 1980, and these were contemporary Batman comics that were on the stands when I was a child. And my dad was like, "All right, we're gonna here you can read these." And the problem with this was probably since the very like towards the end of the '60s, um, or even when the Batman TV, ironically enough, when the Batman '60s TV show has started running, DC Comics really had decided to make their Batman comics more um I, more adult is not quite the right word, but definitely more. I don't know if serious is the serious might be the bit. It was to make them more, I guess, just like intelligent and serious and whatever. But by the time that initiative got to 19, through the '70s to like the very beginning of the '80s, Batman was a serious comic, and so and it's 1980, so I am 6, and I am given these comics, and these are these are like serious crime stories. These are, I mean, really well written, great crime stories that I did not understand as a 6-year-old at all. And so these were dollar comics that had like stories featuring like every Batman spin-off character. So it'd be Batman, Robin, Batgirl, and Black Lightning, and I didn't understand anything from these comics. Like I couldn't get into it because it was completely different than the Batman I knew, completely different. And I mean, my God, this is the cover. Like, can you imagine? I'm 6 years old, and this is the comic in my hand, and it's like a guy's gonna like stab Bruce Wayne through the chest, as like and what's this one? So this was a two-parter, and so this one was yeah, it's another guy gonna get stabbed through the chest. And so I just didn't understand that stuff, and I think the only story out of all of them that I would understand a little bit was the Robin stories because I liked Robin, and so I was just like, oh, I kind of gave it, and it was just Robin like in college and stuff, but I was like, I really liked Robin, so I was like, I'm gonna give this an extra chance, but yeah, like I just didn't understand these comics, I didn't really actually get. And then they took Batman '66. I call it Batman '66, the '60s TV show. They took it off the air. They took it off syndication, like it just the rights, whatever, and suddenly it was no longer on TV. And I was devastated. And for years I was devastated. And that would be like, I think they took it out of syndication like in the early '80s, and it was just like I was so devastated because this is back when we didn't have the internet, and but no, I mean, how could I? The only Batman '66 stuff I could have access to was once in a while they would play there was a movie based on the TV show, and once in a while they would play that, and that was it. Um, and so I just sort of drifted away from comics, and then in the mid '80s, like '84, late '84 into '85. my dad took me again to the comic store just to see, just like a thing, like, because it was near the park where that me and my brother and sister were playing at. And it's like, oh, we'll just go there. And that's when I discovered other types of comics. And uh, that's really when, that's when I was at an age where I was developing my own taste in things. And it was actually it was kind of exciting that I was developing because you're going from a kid and you're kind of absorbing what is kind of thrown at you and stuff like that, and then like I'm reaching, like, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and I'm developing my own tastes and stuff. And so I'm going to the comic store again in the mid 80s, right when that would hit, right when that hit, right? So I'm like, what do I want to buy here? And it turned out, I mean, what I wanted to buy Howard the Duck. I wanted to buy Howard the Duck, and I would try out a bunch of different, I bought, like, try out different things, and then it wasn't that interested in the DC stuff anymore. But what I did discover, well, okay, I have to back up. At around the same time okay, what might have happened before the return to the comic book store in the mid 80s was that in the mid 80s, I was in elementary school, but it was heading into junior high school, and there are boys in my class or friends of mine who started bringing their comics to class, like they're not supposed to, but they did, and I started borrowing their comics, and I think that's where my newfound interest in comics and the types of comics, discovering the types of comics I liked, started, because they were reading G.I. Joe comics, they were reading Transformers comics. They had Secret Wars, the miniseries Secret Wars, which was huge. And I remember reading a couple issues of Secret Wars, borrowing it from my friend. Like, one friend was named Keith. And I would borrow this from Keith, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I have to read all. Like, it opened up a whole world to me, Secret Wars. And so, like, it was Secret Wars, and yeah, Transformers and G.I. Joe were really big. And then they had this miniseries called The Punisher, and I found that, like, and it was it was just something like I've never seen before, like, and it was just the Punisher, and I was like, oh wow. So yeah, I'm borrowing it from my friend Keith, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, this is wow, like, everything like that. And it's funny, right? Because only like a whole bunch of, like, several years before, I couldn't understand, the crime comics, the crime stories in the latest Batman comics, right? But now I'm, like, reading The Punisher, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And so, like, then around that time, my dad decides, to take us to the comic book store, like the comic specialty store again, and I'm picking out my own comics. And I remember, like, I took The Punisher off the rack, the issue off the rack, and I was like, can you buy me this? And my dad was like, no, I cannot buy you this. I cannot buy you, because this is an adult comic. Like, this is an adult crime comic book. This is clearly not for children. And it's not, it is just a crime story. And so it didn't get me that. But I started getting some issues of Secret Wars. And it's like I wanted like every single issue of that to find out what was going on there. And then I discovered X-Men comics and all the spin-offs of the X-Men. And that was like the Pandora's box watershed moment, because, like, I need them all. Like, because it wasn't just the Uncanny X-Men, and at that time it was Chris Claremont and John Romita Jr. were the team on it, but it was all these other books that were tied into, either tied into the X-Men or tied into the Secret Wars. And and soon, like, there would be the sequel to Secret Wars 2. So, like, then there was even more stuff, like, so it wasn't just, you couldn't just buy one thing. You had to, whatever. And then, the Howard the Duck movie was being released, and so then it was like, I just felt like I needed to get Howard the Duck, and so it was just an exciting time, and definitely the DC comics seemed like dumb to me at that point. Like, I had grown out of them, and they were dumb. And so I was just into Marvel, but it was just an exciting time, because I was becoming older, and I was choosing my own comics. I was developing my own personal taste. And as that like progressed, into the late 80s, I was just more and more obsessed, like deep, like this huge like Marvel fan, and really buying, like all the X-Men stuff, like really emotionally invested in X-Men, like deeply, and everything. And then I remember there was that sea change in Marvel where you started to have the Rob Liefeld stuff and the Todd McFarlane stuff. Todd McFarlane in Spider-Man, and Rob Liefeld in New Mutants, and Jim Lee in X-Men. And that was really exciting. And everybody was really excited. I never saw, the local comic shop so excited. Everybody was excited. I was excited. And it was like, suddenly comics were like really popular now, because we had these really strong artists, these really bombastic, exciting artists, the artists that had exciting art, and everything. And the comic books became more and more focused on the art, and then, X-Force #1 came out, and the new Spider-Man came out, #1, and everything, and I was really excited. Everything, I was so excited. But and I would buy multiple copies. I started buying multiple copies to invest in and everything. But the funny thing was, as that was going on, my interest in actually reading the comic books themselves plummeted. And I'm not blaming the creative teams involved in these books or anything, because I really think it was an exciting time. But I noticed that my personal interest, it was going from being so emotionally invested, like couldn't wait for the next issue of these books, to just being like this flat, like this sort of like, all right, yeah, I bought this latest cool issue. I bought 5 copies, and bagged and boarded, and now I'm going to put them away. And did you read them? No, did not read them. And it was interesting. And so it was just, I was losing actual interest in those books. And what took the place of that were more, because now I'm like into my teens, and what took the place of all that was more, I guess you would call, adult comic books. It would be stuff like Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, and I think Marvel had a line called Epic Comics. They had a comic called Martial Law, which is a lot like Judge Dredd, but like even more insane. Loved Martial Law. There are a whole bunch of independent black and white comic books, like weird shit, and I was really getting into that. And Love and Rockets, the Brothers Hernandez, and it just kept going and going and going. And I just said that's where my attention shifted in comic books. And did I ever really get that attention back to the main comic books? I sort of did. I sort of did, but it was like I went through a cycle. I went through like a whole like cycle of reading, and then I think in terms of really being interested in comics again, like reading them, like regular superhero comics for enjoyment. Annie, Annie, I'm recording something, sweetheart. I'm recording something. I don't know how to pause this. Annie, I don't know how to pause this. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this because my cat now wants to be fed, and her whining will never stop until I feed her. So this was like a great 30-second warning or whatever of how long this video would be. But anyway, and I can discuss the next part later, of just like, where did my interest in comic books as an adult go, and where do they travel and whatever. But the long story short is that I ended up working in comic books. I ended up editing Batman comics. And I ended up writing a couple of Punisher stories, and an X-Men story. And so it all came, as they say, full circle. And I will tell you more in the next video. But now I have to feed my cat, because she's going to do the next. She's on the counter right now, sniffing at the counter, and she's going to do this whole cascade of yodels until I feed her. And so we don't want that, do we? No. So, but I will tell you more about how I got into comics and all that good stuff in, the next video or two. Or I may just do like another fashion doll video, and that'll be so much fun, right? But thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later. Bye.